Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you. It works. So I'm here to talk about the redesign of Johnston, London's underground typeface. So this is the first project I worked on when I joined Monotype in February, and I really couldn't have thought of a more amazing way to start my new job in London. From a foreigner's point of view, it's really a legendary piece of graphic and type design. So yeah, it's a really great honor to work on this project. And I just want to quickly say that I didn't work alone on this project, but along with Nadine Shahin and Toshi Omagari. So before I get more into the detail of the projects, just so you have a basic idea of what I'll be talking about, I just wanted to show you a brief sort of preview of the three main stages of the typeface. So the top line is the initial wood type by Johnston himself. The second line is New Johnston, so the first digital font that existed, from which we started the project. And the third one is the interpretation that we produced at Monotype. So as you can see, the differences are pretty subtle. So it's not really a pure creation kind of project, but more a revival, refresh, or recreation. So just a little bit of history. Edward Johnston himself was a very interesting character. Apart from this typeface, he's mostly known as a calligrapher and a teacher. He revived calligraphy, which was pretty much dead by the end of the 19th century. And he sort of rediscovered medieval techniques of writing with a broad nib pen. He also really strongly disliked all sorts of manufactured and industrial production. So I think there must have been a sort of tension probably when he accepted this job, which is an interesting fact. He wrote writing, illuminating, and lettering in 1906. And already you can see a few bits here and there, a few elements that will appear later in the typeface. So in 1913, he was commissioned by Frank Pick to design a set of uppercase letters for the underground network. And I think just want to take a minute to talk about Frank Pick, because I think he's really the unsung hero of this story, in a way. As you can see, the brief that he gave to Johnston already really defined the typeface. He actually hesitated to design the typeface himself. And yeah, I think he was really a great visionary. He really insisted on having a consistency of design across the network and on all mediums, and he understood that a typeface could be a key element in this. So these are Johnston's early sketches. And so first was only a set of uppercase letters that were basically some models for people to then make lithographic posters. And it's interesting because you can see that in these early sketches, the typeface is not in a final form yet. It's really trying to find the right tone. Like you can see some different W's, and some letters are still really trying to find their shapes. And the typeface really came alive in the first uses, which would be unthinkable nowadays when you have to create a project really fast in matters of weeks or months. So you can see in these early uses some really strange proportions on the letters, like this very wide N or T or H. And so as the typeface is being more and more used by TFL, a lowercase is commissioned, and here too, in these early examples, you can see it's some awkward sort of spacing and proportions. So here again, the typeface is really trying to find its voice as it appears in the first uses. In 1916, so that's 3 years after the commission, a complete set is done in wood and metal type. And I think that's probably a time when Johnston revised and stabilized the alphabet into a more coherent whole. So if we take a look more into the actual proportions of the typeface, below you can see the double pages from Johnston's book. On the left is pictures from the Trajan column in Rome. And so you can see that there are really similar sort of proportions, like the very narrow B or very wide C and D, for instance. Same thing with the lowercase. That's an exercise for the humanist minuscule calligraphy model. And you can see some strong resemblance, like the lowercase a. You also understand why the I and J have this diamond-shaped title, which come from the broad-nib pen. And I think to really understand how revolutionary the typeface was, you have to have an idea of what was the state of typography at the time. The Industrial Revolution had made its mark onto society, and what you would see everywhere were grotesques. So personally, I really love these shapes. They're really, really beautiful shapes, but at the time, they were really a strong sort of representation of industrialization. And I think for people like Johnston, they were a sort of typographic monstrosity, in a way. And so in this very, very schematic view of type history, you can see that the grotesque are a sort of logical prolongation of the modern letter. And so what Johnston did was basically to go back half a century in time to use a humanist model into a sans serif typeface. So as I said, the century goes by, the wood type is being worn down and new technologies are emerging. And so H. Ikono at an agency called Banks & Mile completely reworked the typeface to make first typeface for phototype setting and then later digital font. So you can see that Johnston is not one specific typeface, but it's really more a sort of evolving sort of archetype. And I think that's what makes this project very interesting. Even through the century, quite a few times the question as to whether Johnston should be kept or not was asked. And each time the answer was to finally keep it, but to modify it. And so 100 years after Frank Peake, when John Hunter, this is John Hunter from TfL, the head of design, he commissioned Monotype to redesign New Johnston. And the brief really focused on a few key elements, like the lowercase g, also to create signs for the web, which obviously were not so much in use at the time of Johnston, and some lighter weights as well. So when we started the project, we had the chance to visit the London Transport Museum Depot in Acton. It was really great because you have amazing buses and trains, and also you can see in one place all the different states of Johnston. And then we went on to compare New Johnston to the original wood type. So as you can see, there are strong differences on the lowercase g, for instance. That was one of the things the brief focused on mostly. But also overall the proportions had changed quite a lot. It had become more functional, more space saving, overall narrower. So that was a very logical thing to do at the time when Ikono designed New Johnston. But in a way, we thought it had lost some of its soul. And we also looked at these amazing posters from the time of Johnston and realized that there was a real sense of joy of taking the tube at the time, which is obviously no longer the case. Some really nice coaches, but it's really a sort of luxury. So in a way, by changing slightly the proportions, we tried to very slightly give us this sense of joy and a more sort of relaxed feel. We also tried to go back to a sort of geometry which was really strongly present in the original drawings, and to have less optical corrections. Same here on the D, something more geometrical. And I think this is really something that was present in Johnston's original drawing. So yeah, we tried to go back to something a bit more authentic to Johnston's original intentions. Also, because we needed to add some lighter weight, I decided to create a hairline version. So partly for production purposes, but also because it's a very interesting way to research a typeface in a visual way, to try to look for its skeleton, its structure, and strip it from all the stylistic attributes. So, ooh. Okay, that doesn't work. It's okay. So, ooh. Okay, it does. So this was at first a way to create sort of intermediary weights. But when Nadine saw this, who was looking over the general project, she immediately fell in love with the lighter weight. And we decided to show it to TFL, who immediately loved these hairline weights as well. So we decided to keep this hairline typeface. It was a very interesting exercise, probably the most challenging part of the project. And hopefully it manages to bring a sort of fresh, something a bit fresh to the project while retaining the spirit of Johnston. So this is the final family. So the typeface will gradually replace New Johnston. It will first be used on on TFL's promotional posters and material, on the web as well, obviously, and then it will progressively replace any signs that needs to be changed, and it will be used throughout the new Elizabeth line. But already it's a real pleasure to see your typeface in use in such iconic pieces of information design. This is the famous map by Harry Beck. And it's going to be exciting to see it progressively arrive in the network. And that's really the final test of any typeface, to see how it performs in real life. So fingers crossed. Thank you very much.